Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wildcrafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to the show. I have got a real treat for you today. This is going to be the first guest I've ever interviewed on the Southern Appalachian Herb Show, and normally I would say she needs no introduction, because this is a lady's name that if you're into herbs or homesteading or permaculture, you know. But I am getting so many questions every week from people who are saying, you know, not just how do I make a tincture, but what's permaculture? And my favorite question, of course, is if you don't go to the doctors, what do you do when you get sick? The answer, of course, is I get well. So I'm going to now give you a very basic, this is Marjory Wildcraft. She is the most amazing lady. She's an author. She's founder of the Grow Network, featuring Who's Who in America for her work in building deep community resilience and restoring heirloom genetics, gardens, and livestock. Let me tell you. This lady put together a course called Grow Your Own Groceries. It's sold, I believe, more than 500,000 copies. She is really, really something. So without further ado, welcome Miss Marjory Wildcraft.
Hey, Judson, thank you so much for having me on. And, you know, I got to say how much I really appreciate it. If y'all don't know, Judson is in the Grow Network forums and he writes for us. And if there's anything that I've accomplished, it's because of the team and the people that are around me. So, and I'm super appreciative of the Grow Network. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. Well, first of all, since we do have a lot of people that are new to this, and actually several people have joined the Grow Network forums saying they heard about it on my podcast. So this is a good opportunity. Could you kind of describe what the Grow Network is, what your mission is for the network?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. We want to stop the destruction of the earth via homegrown food. And homegrown food on every table is one of our catalyzing statements. And so we teach people, you know, how to do it in your backyard. You know, chickens, rabbits, a garden. If you live in an apartment, there's a lot of things you can do. And then also a thing that goes kind of hand in hand with that is herbal medicine and home medicine and taking care of yourself that way. Commercial agriculture and conventional medicine, unfortunately, both of them are just hugely, hugely destructive entities, you know. So now we're getting a huge influx of people because, of course, of the crisis that we're in. And actually, I totally knew this crisis was it was pretty obvious to, I think, almost everybody. If you look into your heart, you're like, yeah, the path we're on is completely unsustainable. And so we built the Grow Network for that, to be able to serve during this time.
Yeah, and I agree with what you just said. I mean, honestly, I thought we were going to hit this point, you know, back in the crash about, 20 years ago now, when things started going downhill. I was surprised it took this long. When did you start the Grow Network?
Yeah. I started it in 2009, but actually it was the early 2000s when I really began to go, oh my gosh, I have got to change my life. And you know, just like I'm just becoming aware of all kinds of things, like whatever happened on 9/11, I promise you, I have an engineering degree. an airplane flying into a building does not cause it to collapse. So I was like, what? How could that be the story everybody's believing? And it really had me open up to, like, what else is going on in the world that might be obvious but nobody's paying attention to? And the food supply, being a young mom at the time and really starting to learn more about nutrition. But there was one story in particular that really shook me to the core. Was I did a lot of, I could see economic collapse was in the cards. And I was doing a lot of interviewing of collapse survivors and reading historical novels. And, we know what happens in collapse. It's a pretty common pattern. Humanity has been through this many, many times. And one of the biggest things that happens is food. Like, yeah, you need to beef up on defense and maybe learn to handle a pistol, and definitely need to get some medicine training. But food was the biggest thing that all the survivors talked about. They were starving. And I said, oh, wow, I think I'm going to organize the farmers. I wasn't going to grow my own. I'm going to organize the farmers. And I was involved with this group that was trying to get locally grown food into an elementary school. And that project completely failed. And the biggest thing we learned from it is there was no locally grown food. And we were living outside of Austin, Texas, which is like a pretty progressive, it's the headquarters for Whole Foods and all that. There was not enough locally grown food to provide even part of the vegetables for an elementary school in the county that I was in, which is right next door. And I just couldn't stop shaking because, all those Willie Nelson concerts to save the small farms didn't work.
Didn't get it done. I know. Could have had David Allen Coe up more. He'd have shook things up. But, I came up with the same conclusion when I was down on the coast, and I'm going to the restaurants, and I'm saying, where are you getting your seafood from? Cisco. And, this is a port, I won't give the exact name, but the main seafood fishing port in North Carolina, and every single restaurant was Cisco. And, then it hit me. If there's a little bump in the supply chain, there's not going to be food in these restaurants.
Yeah,
basically,
that's part of what...
we're paying the farmers not to grow food, and we're paying the fishermen not to fish, and we're relying on this stuff from, overseas, and who knows how it's being grown. You've heard the nightmare stories about tilapia grown in the sewers of China. I don't know about all that.
Well, the other nightmare that actually was a literal nightmare for me for years, and if anybody out there now is going through panic attacks, or freaking out, or starting to have relationships deteriorate because you're wondering if that person is how useful they'll be in a situation, I've been through all that, and there's only 4 days worth of food supply, and there's this apparent abundance, which I think that veil has been broken a little bit last year when people saw empty shelves, and if you look closely now, I call it thin shelves, like they have all the inventory shoved up to the front, but it's only like 1 or 2 cans back, and it's not, or the variety is not there, or that 4 days worth is ubiquitous throughout most of the United States and actually a lot of the world. There are some small local areas where there are exceptions, but when I realized that, I literally could not stop shaking for hours, and that, needless to say, that project to get local food into the elementary school completely collapsed, and I just said, wow, if we're going to have farmers, they start from gardeners, and I've got to learn to grow food. And then I need to learn to teach people how. And that was the genesis of it. So I spent pretty intense, crazy 8 years, like taking permaculture classes and homesteading classes and biointensive gardening and any kind of gardening and citizen forester and, hanging out with barefoot crazies in the national forest. Like, how do they do it? They aren't skinny. Visiting with Tarahumara Indians or going off, just crazy. When I get obsessed with something, it's crazy. And then I started having some success and figuring out basic principles and teaching people, and that's when I made that first video. And I was really shocked that a video on growing food would go viral, but it did.
I think
and that was really.
But that's what people appreciate so much about you is you're so. the little I know about your background, your career in financial industries and such, you're very practical, and now you tell me you've got a degree in engineering. Your mind is much more linear and logical than so many people really in our among our peers, and you present things in such a common sense way. I think it just it appeals to everybody.
Oh my God, Judson, it just drives me nuts how out of touch out of touch everything is. I know there's a big conversation now among people about how the globalists are taking over and they're going to force this and that and the other, and I've been looking at their agenda and I'm realizing these people just don't realize how things work, how important backyard food production is and how things grow. And I can give you, they're mostly talking to universities and heads of large companies or big nations, and I'm like, who can talk to them? And one piece of it so far, we all bust out. I mean, really, a roll on the floor laughing moment was my web developer, Jimerson, forwarded me a study that the University of California had done where they found out that they could take old food waste and turn it into soil.
Oh, boy.
I know. That just like, okay. I think we all kind of get...
Yeah.
We all got to get back to some basics here, like really there needs to be, I kind of don't want to use their languaging, but there really does need to be a reset, and we are in that process, so.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, so much of it, I love some of these shows on PBS where they're really showing, organic farming, and it's really good, but then sometimes it's like, and did you know you can take your table scraps and feed them to pigs? And it's like, wow, where do you find these people?
Yeah.
But then again, I was doing online cooking classes, and someone kept telling me that they couldn't get their their pasta to turn out right. And after 2 hours of asking questions, I realized she didn't understand the difference between simmering water and boiling water. I mean, we are so far from our roots. We are so far from logic. But, it's funny as far as permaculture. The way I first heard about the Grow Network, it was, I think it was Paul Wheaton's first season of his podcast. And he says, hey, I just heard from Marjory Wildcraft. This is huge. She's got the biggest network in the world. Expletive deleted, cough, expletive deleted. Paul.
God, I love Paul. Yeah, he is a handful. He is definitely his own unique brand of personality, that's for sure. I do love what he's doing. Yeah. Yeah, It's so funny because we're just a humble little organization, and whenever we hire, we're working with a company to help us with some marketing on some herbs or something like that, and they're like, I'm a little confused as to who does what, and I said, that's because everybody does three things. Like, we can't afford to pay anybody to do anything. You got to do everything, right?
That's the way it ought to be.
It's a real lean, small group, but yet we have a really active and engaged forums. We have a store with products, and we have a blog where we're posting almost daily with really, really cool articles. I love the articles we post, and we have an academy with a bunch of certifications that take people step by step on how to do this. And then of course
we're happy to participate in, by the way.
Yeah, right. Everybody's like, yeah, we want that beer and wine cert. Get that one going.
Well, I did one on
we
bitters,
got it going
and
on.
It's up now. Right.
Yeah, so we got it going on, and I've mostly just been focused on look, you guys, there's going to be this big issue where there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are going to want to know how to grow food fast. What can we build in anticipation of that? Because we're about to hit a humanitarian crisis. The news even was saying, the United Nations even said that we're heading into a famine of the biblical proportions. I'm like, the United Nations does not use something like biblical proportions. Like, what? Who the heck wrote that headline, So it's
a wake-up call.
Tough.
Yeah. Well, don't forget the homegrown food summits and homegrown medicine summits. You have some huge names on there. I was just looking through that, the past ones this morning, and Joel Salatin, Rosemary Gladstone, Dr. Patrick Jones, my favorite. I mean, you've really, you're bringing the best of the best to people.
Thank you. Yeah, just years of being in the space and abiding by the golden rule that, you know, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And it's a really simple business model. Yeah.
Well,
astonishingly
like I said,
effective.
there are a bunch of herbalists that are on the summits and such. Is there one in particular that you really follow or who influenced you, your philosophy of home medicine?
Well, my first herbalist teacher was Nicole Telks, and she's on Summit sometimes and sometimes not. She created our Home Medicine 101 certification,
right.
And that was my first training. Basically, I did her intensive. And actually for years she used to come out to my farm and in Texas, and she would do a plant walk, and she would teach her next class of herbalists that were coming along, and it was great because I would, Latin names and plants, like you know them and then you forget them, and then you know them and you forget them. So every year Nikki would come, and she had herbalist yoga, and you'd get in some really weird position, and she wouldn't let you out of it until you could come up with the Latin name for some crazy plant, you know. Like, oh God. So we had a lot of fun, but really so many teachers. Doug Simons was also hugely influential. Doc Jones, Rosemary Gladstar, Susan Weed, almost all of the ones that are on the summits, and the plants themselves, but just so much, and I really don't consider myself I'm not really a professional herbalist. And people, I'll get on a radio show or do a podcast like this, and somebody will call in and they go, I've got this condition, can you tell me what to do? And I'm like, if it came up in my family sometime in the last 20 years, I can probably treat it. Right. But if it didn't, I can't, I kind of take care of what comes up, right? So if you have busted ribs or a laceration or a pink eye or, all that kind of stuff that has come up in the last 20 years in a family of 4, that's pretty outdoorsy.
Well, don't forget the big one, and I want to let people know that Miss Wildcraft practices what she preaches. She's not just a person who writes about things and talks about things. Tell them about the rattlesnake.
Oh, yeah, actually it was a copperhead. Yeah.
Oh, it was a copperhead. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty darn serious, too. So.
Well, I was breaking the number one rule in homesteading in life, and that is don't put your hands on your feet where you can't see them. I think Minnie Pearl might have said, you just mind your own business. Anyway, what I had done was I was growing this patch of tomatoes, and then the first round of them, which was these Roma tomatoes that I wanted to make part paste and sauce, well, a cold snap got them, so I had a second planting ready, and I planted them, and my ducks got in there, and they didn't eat them, but they sat on them. And then I said, wow, I really want tomatoes, so I'm running out to the local nurseries, and of course everybody else had a cold snap, so there's nothing left except for these beefsteak tomato plants. And I thought, well, it's something. I'll grow them, right? They do not grow in Central Texas. That's not like something that happens, right? But I'm like, whatever. And I was taking care of it, and they grew into this gigantic megalomaniacal jungle. I mean, it was huge. And I went out to check on them one June. It was actually June 21st, the summer solstice. And it was in the afternoon. And I found this one beefsteak tomato. I mean, I was wishing there was a tomato contest right then and there, because this thing was 8 inches in diameter and just perfect. You couldn't hardly hold it in one hand. It was just perfect. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder if there's another one in there. So I just recklessly plunged into the patch looking for another one. And then something dug into my foot, and I'm like, and I yanked it back, and whatever it was dug in even deeper, and I thought, dang, a cat's claw vine. And then I thought, wait a minute, I don't have any cat's claw vine in here. That's not a thing I have in my garden. And I was like, well, maybe it was a scorpion, or maybe it was something. And I squat down and look, and there's the 2 telltale holes. And I'm like, the snake bit, And, it ended up being a copperhead. And my husband, where we live way out in the woods, and it's kind of a thing. If you're going to live out there, and we had been there 15 years at that point in time, if you're going to live out there and be homesteading, you're going to eventually do something stupid and get bit by a copperhead. I mean, they're all over the place, and that's just, you know, everybody out there knows about it, and almost everybody that's lived there for a decade or two has been bitten. And so I just said, we're going to treat this at home. We're going to do this at home, and we did. We used prickly pear poulticing and some other stuff. There's some blog posts on the Grow Network site with the full story, but super proud of my daughter, who's 15 years old, really played an important role. And then my husband, you know, my goodness, I mean, he's not super knowledgeable. You know, he's seen me do this stuff, but he knew his crazy wife was not going to go to the hospital. So, you know, I actually was really glad I'd made a video about how to treat infections without antibiotics, which has all the steps. It's the same treatment that you would use for a snake bite or something. I was really glad because I heard them when I was tripping, and when you've got a good dose of copperhead bite, you're tripping. You are tripping. Yeah. Like reality is getting, you know, LSD, right? So, and I heard the video going in there when I was, when I was in and out of it, but we took care of it at home. Yeah, and
well, I think you made the right choice. I mean, you probably heard Jack Spirico's experience of being bitten by a copperhead. He went to the hospital, and they're like, "You weren't bitten by a copperhead." He's like, "Yeah, I was bitten by a copperhead." Yeah, how do you know? Well, I'm a herpetologist. No, you weren't bitten by a copperhead. No, I was seriously bitten by a copperhead. I mean, he actually had to argue with him for like an hour, and his foot was turning black.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now I need to ask you about the book.
See Jack the other night. It's been a few years. I really need to connect up with him. Yeah. He's got a really neat place in outside of Fort Worth. It's really fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've never been there. I've seen it online, but yeah, he's a neat guy. Well, I need to ask you about the new book. You've got a new book coming out. What can you tell us about it?
We sure do, and that's coming out in May. The launch is May 11th, and so years and years and years ago, when I started the Grow Network, I had the video, right, and even though it did go viral, and it wasn't a huge amount, it was actually gone viral because people ripped it and put it on the torrent sites and copied it. It wasn't because they bought it.
Yeah.
And I realized I had to learn about digital marketing and sales, and the thing that worked for me the best was publicity and media. Right, you know, marketing is really, really hard, right? It really, you know, paying this, I'd spend $1,000 for advertising and make $500 in sales. Well, that ain't sustainable. And so I ended up in this whole publicity training, and it was for authors. And I thought, well, you know, books, DVDs, got to be the same thing. Well, it turns out there's a whole world of difference between the two. Learning how to handle the media is the same, but while I was in that program, it was a year-long training coaching program, I learned a lot about the publishing industry, and I learned a lot about if you really want to have a New York Times bestseller, an Amazon bestseller. Back then, we didn't worry about Amazon. Now we do. There's a whole lot you need to put in place to make that happen. And I didn't really want to have it. I mean, that was never really an aspiration, but it occurred to me that if I could really get a book that was on the top of those lists, you get a little megaphone for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever it is, where you can tell the world, hey, I think growing your own food and making your own medicine is really cool. In fact, I think that's better than having money. You know, right? You know, like it's better. And so I decided, and also the things you need to build for that are what I needed to build to prepare the Grow Network for where we're at now. So I thought, wow, I'm going to try and create a book that's a New York Times bestseller. And a couple of years ago, I got in touch with one of the best literary agents in the health, fitness, you know, self-improvement space, and Celeste. And I said, Celeste, I've got a New York Times bestseller. And she's rolling her eyes. She goes, no, Marjory, you got a good book. It's never going to be a bestseller. And I said, Celeste, you don't know what's coming. There's going to be economic collapse. There's going to be people. We're going to go through all kinds of changes. People are going to really be questioning their lives and what's meaningful and what isn't. And they're going to want to grow food. And she's like, yeah. So then in September of 2019, I was looking and watching the Fed was injecting $250 billion into the overnight funds rate, which basically meant that the banks would not lend to each other overnight. And I was like, oh my God, major trust issues in the system. It's going to go. This is it. This is the time. And, I got the proposal into Celeste right away. And sure enough, February and March happened. And in April, Celeste had 18 publishers that bid on the book, and 5 of them said, we see this book as a New York Times bestseller. So it's launching in May.
That is awesome.
I know,
that
right?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it really is. Hey, and you heard it here first, people.
You heard it, yeah, you heard it. Judson knows Marjory.
Maybe not completely.
Right?
No, this is awesome. I am so looking forward to the book. And, I guess that leads me really to my next question, and that's what do you think is coming in the next year or two? What should we prepare for? I know you just did a conference call on that. What are the kind of the bullet points you would like to give us?
Well, the first thing is the systems are collapsing. It is real. It's legitimately happening, and even like a small business like the Grow Network, for example, we had some complaints come in, and people said, hey, we don't want you to sell. Why are you sending us your herbs in plastic bags? And, a lot of herbalists have ethics against using plastic, and we totally understand that. We had tried to send the herbs in. We had tried to get jars that we would send, which is more expensive and heavier in breakage, but that was our ethics also, jars that you could reuse, and we really tried to do that. You can't buy jars. You can't go try to buy a case of mason jars. I have found some sources for them. They used to be $1 a jar. They're now like $3 or $4 a jar. This is in 8 months, right? And the herbs themselves, we can't source the herbs. And the food supply, if you've been paying attention, getting fresh food is really, really, really hard. The U.S. did not have very good production. Our soybean production was like 20% below normal, and the corn production was 10% below normal. And China had bad production, and they're actually buying up anything excess we have. South America, Brazil, that whole area. So there's this global, many, many, many countries are shutting down export of food if they're a producer. So, this is it. You need to be out growing food right now. This is not oh gosh, I'd love to do that when I retire. This is like if you want to be eating food, and unless you have a huge source of income somewhere, because the price of food is going to be skyrocketing and the availability of food is going to be decreasing. So that's definitely coming in 2021. I also see there's just a lot more disturbance. We just saw it in our last political election. There's so much fracturing and so many people so passionate. Like, in order to inaugurate the current president, he had to be surrounded by, depending on which news source, 20 to 40,000 troops, and nobody from the public could be there. That is not a functioning democracy or republic. That's not
organization. Yep.
Yeah. So, we are, and these tensions and this upset, and then combine that with more and more food getting difficult. We're really in a very, very explosive time. And in some ways, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And in other ways, it's like, you know what? The thing was going to implode anyway, right? Mm. And if you've been fired from a job, like, well, did you really want to work there? Why don't you get in touch with what your heart really wants you to do and create a new life for yourself? I mean, that's what this time period is all about.
I agree completely, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, that's why I started doing this podcast, started teaching these herb classes online, and in this next year, beginning of spring, my entire career is going to be devoted to growing and wildcrafting, harvesting herbs to sell to people, and teaching them how to use them, because we've got to become more independent. We can't rely on the system anymore.
We sure do. We sure do. And good on you. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I didn't really have a choice. COVID shut everything down.
Well, there you go. But I think you'd always really wanted to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing this since I was like 15, so it's second nature. It's just I never saw it as valuable until it became valuable.
Exactly, right? Yeah. That's my other big prediction, is that what we used to think of as wealth, which is, stocks and bonds and money, the U.S. dollar. It's going to be fun to see how the U.S. dollar collapses. I really don't know how that's going to unwind, but it's done, And what we used to define as what the big house or the big car or the career, all that stuff which we used to define as wealth is going to change. And the real meaning of wealth, which is health and family, full belly, community, meaningful work, living a life of purpose, that's wealth. And I really see this huge movement toward that. People saying, this is my standard. This is my standard. I'm doing what I love, right? I don't care that I don't have a whatever kind of car it is on those sports car pages, right?
Well, my philosophy on that. You buy the car, you drive it off the lot, it's worth half what you paid for it, and then you spend you mortgage one off of another, you end up spending like 30 years paying for one vehicle, and you're in debt for the next 50 years. I mean, that's a cycle of debt that's like slavery, essentially.
Yeah, I have to confess, so I don't drive because my vision is different from everybody else's, and I don't see well in the visible light spectrum. And but I had this I really want a red Jeep. I don't know why. It was one of these crazy, I saw this really cute red Jeep, and I'm like, I want a red Jeep. And so I got my daughter to drive me to the Jeep lot, and I'm like, let's look at red Jeeps. I was like, oh my God, these things, $35,000 for a Jeep? Are you kidding me? I could buy, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. Maybe I'll get one of those little miniature red Jeeps.
When you get into that system, whether it's a vehicle or a mortgage for a house or college loans, essentially you've turned yourself into livestock. They're coming to you to collect the eggs every day, and then one day they're putting you in the freezer. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you said you had to about, around 12:15. I guess we're getting toward the end here. How about, are there any future plans? What's coming up? What do you see happen with the Grow Network or with your other projects? And also, I heard you were involved with something called the Great Reset. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's so funny. There's the Great Reset that's being promoted by the World Economic Forum, and then there's the Greater Reset, which is being promulgated by a bunch of other people who are kind of against the World Economic Forum. So I'm, I don't care. I'm I think we all should be growing food. I'm kind of into people who want to eat dinner. It doesn't matter what your politics are or what your, and I think we really all need to grow food. We all need to be making medicine. We all need to be getting down to some basics. So, one of the things that we're looking to do with the Grow Network, the book launch is going to be huge, and that's going to be a real challenge for our network to, absorb another 1 million or 2 million members, which is, going to happen. And just, with Penguin Random House throwing their weight around, it's going to be big. And then we're running a bunch of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of challenges in that. And one of the other things we want to do is we're wanting to create a really simple way that you can determine what your bioregion is because people who grow with a similar kind of rainfall and temperature ranges, no matter where in the world you are, if you're getting 30 inches of rain and you're in the 70s to 90s in the summer and you're below freezing in the winter, there's a certain amount of, and you've got, a 180-day growing season or whatever it is. If you fit in those criteria, then you all can kind of grow the same things. You're going to have the same challenges. And so we want to group people together or allow them to group together to share and exchange information. Humans are an unbelievably cooperative species. I mean, we normally look at the, if it bleeds, it leads is what the media, if you read a newspaper or watch the news, you'd think we all hate each other and you'd be wondering how any of us could possibly be alive.
I know.
But, right, but it's not true. We are an unbelievably cooperative species. And I think one of the things that humans do really well is we transmit information and we learn rapidly. And, growing food and making medicine does tend to be a slower process. It's not like Guitar Hero where you can pick it up and in 15 minutes be a rock star. And by cooperating around the world and even playing off northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere and getting two different crop cycles in a year when you may normally only get one, and people working together to collaborate on, this is a great way to do this in this environment, and I got these huge yields, and this crop works really well against the squash vine borer. Coming up with all these things and sharing that information, that's why we built the Grow Network. And so now to really take that to the next level, we want to help people define where it is that they live so that they can find their tribe, their food-growing tribe. So that's a real big piece that we're putting in place.
That's important, too, because, right now we just have the climate analogs, Quatman or whatever it is, and the average person cannot figure that out. They're good if you know what you're looking for, but they're way too complex.
Yeah, and the growing zones, the USDA growing zones, there's all kinds of problems with that. It's a good, it's good for what it is, but it's not the thing. So, so we're just trying to hook up, and, the Grow Network's predominantly American, but it's always been my vision that it would be a global network. I suppose, way down the road, we do want to incorporate other languages, Spanish or Chinese or, other languages. We also do want to incorporate other things like alternative energy and alternative building. But I had always said, we need to start with the basics of growing food and making medicine. That's the most important thing. And then it's a permaculture principle. Start small and move forward from a controlled front. So those things will come, but they'll be years later.
Well, it sounds great. I'm always thrilled to be a part of it. I log in as a moderator. I'm on the forums basically every spare minute because this is where the fun people are, right?
It is, yeah. And we don't allow, and if you want to argue about politics or something like that, you go to Facebook. We send you to Facebook.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have a really positive, proactive, generally good news. There's a lot of good news going on in the planet, and you'll find it there at the Grow Network. So we really take a proactive, forward-looking, what can you do right now? How can we help you right now attitude? And it's a really great space, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm always thrilled to share it with people. In fact, just today I got an email from someone who signed up for all the courses on the Grow Network because I told him, hey, you might want to check out this biointensive gardening course. He said, I looked at it, I got to buy them all. So that's just everybody's reaction to it, Well, Ms. Wildcraft, it has been so good talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And we all appreciate everything you do, and we're behind you 100% and hope you keep doing it.
Oh, thank you so much, Judson. I really appreciate you getting the word out and letting me speak to your audience. And, I hope to see them all in the forum.
Yes, ma'am. Anytime. All right, y'all. You've enjoyed listening to Marjory Wildcraft, and I will see you here next week on the Southern Appalachian Herbs Podcast. See ya.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.